Hi, everyone. Welcome to the third episode of Dr. Marie Speaks. My name is Toroshinia Kennedy, and I'm the producer and host of this new podcast. Dr. Marie Brown Mercadel and I are excited to debut this talk series and take a deep dive into her new book, Getting to My Enough, a story of faith, resilience, and survival. In her memoir, Dr. Marie describes her remarkable journey of persevering through unspeakable childhood sexual trauma, the loss of a baby as a teenager, and her tenacious resolve to get to her enough. Her frank and detailed descriptions of her life experiences are riveting, and they provide proof that it is possible to achieve personal triumphs in spite of the odds. In her book, Dr. Marie writes about the deep-seated emotions that caused her to be overwhelmed with self-doubt, fear, and shame for much of her adult life. Her acts of forgiveness and the adoption of self-love represent an important source of her healing. This podcast was developed for the purpose of giving a space to other women to learn, listen, contribute, and advance conversations related to overcoming trauma, Black mental health, and the myth of the angry Black woman, the imposter syndrome, healing, forgiveness, and a variety of other topics. During this podcast, you need to know that at certain points, either I or Dr. Marie may speak graphically about a few topics. If you find that you are experiencing any type of secondary trauma, please feel free to pause the show and resume listening at another date. With that said, let's start with today's discussion. So, welcome, Dr. Marie. Um, it is great to have another opportunity to continue the discussion about your new book, Getting to My Enough. I keep holding this up because I'm really enjoying reading this and learning about your incredible sense of resolve and resiliency despite everything you've gone through. So, in talking about the book, I can't help but also talk about what you've been doing lately. You've been doing some road shows and promotions. You've been on the road promoting the book. So tell me about this. Your promotions, your events are called Dr. Marie's Sip and Heal. So tell me about the Sip and Heal book discussion series.
So, thank you so much, Tori. I'm excited to be here again to record our third episode. As a matter of fact, I'm sitting in a hotel room in Stockbridge, Georgia, right now. I had an event, a Sip and Heal event last night. So, in addition to this wonderful podcast, I have been hosted by many amazing women so far in Texas, in California, in North Carolina. I have another event on Sunday night here also in Georgia. And I've been given the opportunity to talk about my story and, most importantly, to speak to women about their own survival stories. I'll have to tell you, the conversations have been so impactful. The events are designed to allow for small group conversations about mental health, trauma, self esteem issues, as well as healing practices and teaching us how to affirm ourselves. So, to date, I have spoken to over 140 women and also a few men about mental health, generational trauma, resilience, and healing. And so many women have shared their own personal stories. And I'm grateful that I can be a catalyst for the healing process, because some of these women are speaking about their own stories for the first time. And on one hand, it's overwhelming for me to know that so many people have been holding this in. On the other hand, it's enlightening for me to be part of their journeys and being able to empower them to speak about their own truth and their own stories of survival.
Wow. Wow. This is awesome. That is really awesome. And I feel great about the Sip and Heal sessions, and I'm really grateful that I had the pleasure of attending one of these events, one that you had locally here in San Diego. And
Mhm.
I what I really appreciated about the Sip and Heal session was your candor and your transparency. And I could see on the faces of the women who were present that they had an appreciation for that too. So I'm hoping our listeners can visit the website so that they can get more information about the next locations and times for your upcoming Sip and Heals, and to learn how they too can host their own Sip and Heal in their own city. because I know you're willing to travel. You've
Oh,
been
yes.
crisscrossing the
Yes.
state.
Mhm, mhm.
So, I want to encourage people to check the website because I think it would be great and with the experience that they would probably um, appreciate having in their town. So, back to today and back to the book. We are going to talk about the book's chapters 12 through 16. And in these chapters, we're going to be moving from different stages, from the beginning stages of your life to the time when you knew you needed to make some changes. So
Mm.
I'm really excited to get through it. Before we talk about each of these chapters and the focus, um, tell me a little bit about what was going on with you in this stage in your life that's covered in chapters 12 through 16.
So, around the stage in my life, I had just graduated from high school. I graduated from high school early, and I started attending San Bernardino Valley Community College in San Bernardino, California. So, I should have been in a place where I had a head start to complete my associate's degree and move on to a 4 year school. But I was still managing and masking the internalized pain from my childhood. So remember, I buried myself in reading, I buried myself in books. And so I always had really good grades. And when I moved from North Carolina to California, finally to live with my mom, I had enough credits to graduate early, and my grades were always really good. I wanted to leave Rialto and go to San Diego State University, but my parents didn't approve. So, and without their financial support, I could not go to San Diego State University. So there was a combination of pain and rebellion. And I went to the community college, and initially my grades were good. First quarter, they were really good. Second quarter, they were really good. But by the third quarter, I was failing. And I lost funding that I was also receiving. At that time, if you had a parent that was on disability, then the child would get disability benefits if they were going to school full time. And so I stopped going to class really, and I started hanging out more so at an Air Force base, Norton Air Force Base, that is now defunct. That was located also in San Bernardino, and that's where I started hanging out at more um, instead of going to school. So it was a really tumultuous time for me because I knew I needed to be doing something differently, but at the same time, I didn't have the emotional maturity to do what I needed to do because I was in pain.
So you just said that you were in pain, and you a few minutes ago when you first started, you said that you were managing some internalized pain.
Mhm,
Tell me more about that.
mhm, mhm. So, recall that my childhood was interrupted by the sexual abuse that I experienced for 3 years by my older brother. Then I was bullied at school for a while. I felt like an outsider because it appeared to me in my child mind that most of my associates or friends had two-parent households. So I felt abnormal because I didn't have a two-parent household because my mom left and she left my siblings and I, and then the abortion that I had as a teenager, and I was aging chronologically, but emotionally, I was stuck. If that makes any kind of sense.
Hmm.
Once I moved to California, my mom and I never had any discussions about the abortion, and at that time, I was unaware that she didn't know about the sexual abuse. I thought she knew. I didn't realize until I was in my 20s that she didn't know. So in my mind, you knew about these things, but you're not talking to me about them. It's like we're hiding these things. So she didn't know about the sexual abuse, but she knew about the abortion. And I probably needed therapy, during that time. Therapy wasn't really a thing during that time, especially for children, right? And surprisingly, my mom was a medical professional by this time. She was a nurse, and that wasn't presented as an option, and it wasn't even something that I had ever thought about. I wasn't even really familiar with therapy as a thing or as at that time, and it was very difficult. And so I was just kind of moving through life um, the best way I know how.
So, yeah, you're moving through life, and that was, that was partly covered in chapter 12. And in chapter 13, moving to chapter 13, you're moving through life, this new stage. You recognize the challenges with school and what that ended up meaning that you were no longer in school and you're working. And so you start working, and then you meet your first husband, Gregory.
Mhm.
um, you later decided to get married, and I'm wondering, do you think you were mentally ready to do that? Because you were chronologically older, but you weren't emotionally older. Do
Mhm.
you really think you were mentally ready to do that, to get married?
Well, at the time, I was 19. So at the time, I absolutely thought that I was ready. But in retrospect, the absolute last thing I needed to do was get married. I was emotionally unequipped. Greg was also was young. He was an airman at the time that I met him, and he worked in the pharmacy. And so after we got married, we ended up moving with my mother. We had had an apartment together before we got married. We ended up getting evicted from that apartment because we weren't really good at managing our money. When we got evicted from the apartment, he went back to the base and I went back to my mom's. And a few months later, we got married. And then we moved together to my mom's apartment. She liked Gregory a lot. And then we got transferred to San Antonio, Texas, where he was assigned to work as a drill sergeant. Now, the schedule that he had was ridiculous. Some mornings he would go to work at, 4 a.m., to leave the house at 3:30 a.m. and, get home at 12, 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Some days he went around noon and got home at 9, 10 o'clock at night because it's a 24-hour cycle in training these young men. He was only training young men at the time. I also had found work with the county, working in a group home for adults with disabilities. I worked the overnight shift and I worked a lot of overtime. Things were going okay at first, but with my schedule and his schedule, and we worked very long hours, and we didn't really spend a lot of quality time together. And I wanted to do things that most, 20-year-olds, I'm 20 by now, wanted to do. I wanted to go out. I wanted to hang out. I wanted to go listen to music at the clubs and that kind of thing. Because when I met Gregory, he was actually DJing on the side in the club. And with our schedules, and especially his schedule, that just was not possible. And we were both very, very headstrong. I would say that Gregory and I are both type A personalities. And that was just a recipe for disaster. So, a year later, I got pregnant with my daughter Chantel, and by the time she was 6 months old, we were separated, and I was once again living in North Carolina.
So, yeah, yeah, I know you're a type A personality. Being
Mhm.
your friend and working
Oh.
alongside you, I know you're a type A person. And what comes along with that is being a planner. I know you're a really good planner, but I want to talk about 20-year-old Marie, who's now a
Mhm,
mother. You find yourself back in North Carolina, starting all over again without a
mhm,
degree and with
mhm,
that baby Chantel. What
mhm.
was your plan at that time?
Well, 20-year-old Marie did not have a plan um, at all because when I went to North Carolina, I actually remember going home for Easter vacation. Okay. So that meant I had 2 weeks worth of clothes for myself and 2 weeks worth of clothes for Chantel. So got there and we agreed, both Gregory and I, that we needed to spend some time apart. And so I decided that I was going to stay at my mom's house for a while, or our family home, because by the time that time my mom had moved back um, to North Carolina after my dad passed away. He passed away when I was pregnant with Chantel, a few months before Chantel was born. And I went back and I stayed with my mom. And then after about a month, I was like, yeah, well, I have to move out because I had lived on my own. And so I couldn't go back to a home with my mom saying, okay, well, I need you to be in by this time, this time, this time. Like, no, that's not going to work. And then I knew I needed to spend more time getting myself together. So, and I didn't know what was going to happen with Gregory and I at the time, but um, I figured I was not going to wait. I got my own apartment, and I got a job, but I didn't have a car. Um, when came for those 2 weeks, I didn't have a plan, so I left everything behind. That meant my clothes and furniture. I mean, I didn't even have forks and spoons when I moved into an empty apartment. So I had to slowly furnish the apartment and regroup. I found a job immediately because it was never hard for me to find a job, but I still didn't have a car. So I'd catch rides to work. I worked the midnight to 8 a.m. shift. I had significant amount of help from my mom and my sisters in helping me to take care of Chantel. I enrolled in community college and I would take classes when I got off work in the morning. So after being up all night, and I would go straight to class on most days. And I resumed that 11-year journey to complete my undergraduate degree. Um, Several months passed by, and my mom helped me get a car, and that was a tremendous help. And I was stabilizing. Things weren't great, but I was stabilizing, and I started to develop a plan. I'm going to work. I'm going to go to school. I'm going to go to this community college, and then I'm going to transition to a 4-year school and get my degree. And I'm just going to, keep moving. So I was forming a plan, but unlike today, where I normally have a plan and a plan A and a B and a C and a Z, I didn't have that back then because again, I was 20 and I was just not emotionally in a place where I needed to be at that time.
And so that helps bridge chapters 14 and 15, where as chapter 14 is titled, it's time to get it together, sister. You got
Hmm.
your education together, you were getting
Hmm.
your career together, you were getting your home life together. And then
Hmm.
chapter 15 with the eagle pride, it's talking about connecting aspects of your childhood to young adult Marie, parent Marie. But in the quest to stabilize things, um, it sounds like that stabilization was short-lived, because when you talk about things that occurred in chapters 14 and 15, don't you agree that that sense of stabilization was short-lived?
It absolutely was. I left my initial job that I got with the county. I was working in a detox center. Um, and it was the place where people came for short term detoxification before they went on to a long term treatment. And I left that position because I was promoted to a job as an assistant director at a private organization. And I enjoyed that job a lot because I was working with youth that had behavior disorders, all males, which I really prefer to work with male clients. It's a lot easier to work with male clients than female clients from my perspective and my own experiences. However, I was sexually harassed by my boss at that job. And once I rebuffed his advances, I was eventually fired from that job. If I would have been more astute in knowing what I know now, I would have sued him for sexual harassment, but I was in survival mode. So I just tried to move on. I found another job at a facility that served children that had disabilities. And I loved that job. I loved working with this population. Many of them were non-ambulatory. They didn't walk. They were nonverbal. And so I really enjoyed, working with this population. But after a few months, I was fired from that job too. And honestly, Tori, I can't even tell you why I got fired from that job. I felt like I was doing a good job. Even when I look back, I went to work on time. I worked extra shift. I was good with the kids. I didn't engage in the circle, in the political. That was my first taste of knowing that there's a political circle at work, that either you're in that circle or you're out of that circle. And I wasn't in that circle. Um, but I also think that God was trying to tell me something, that was 2 strikes in 1 year. I wasn't gonna wait for the 3rd strike. I think he was telling me that I needed to leave that community that I grew up in and go and finish school. There was not a 4-year college in my um, community. The closest one was about an hour away, the University of North Carolina at Wilmington. But I wanted to go to historically Black college or university. And all of the HBCUs were about a 3-hour drive from there. And so I was broke. Um, I was working a PRN position that was barely helping me pay my bills. coupled with the child support that I was getting. And then I also was on food stamps for about, I don't know, maybe about a year, a little bit under a year. Applying for food stamps really lit a fire inside me. I was working in human services, but I was never prepared to be a consumer of human or social services. And I knew that it was time for me to get together. It was time for me to go and get out of that community and try to be able to move forward with my life.
I just can't even begin to imagine, what you were thinking in terms of all those various decisions and options that you had to keep in mind when it was not just providing for yourself, but providing for this child, beautiful 4-year-old Chantel. Like, I can't even imagine having to commute the way you did, and then also having to pivot professionally with the job losses, thinking, how are you going to provide? And then somebody who had already done really well in school, and then you find yourself on food stamps,
Mhm.
and somebody who grew up in a household where both your parents were present for most of the time in your early years, and then not in your teen years, and then here you are not wanting to have that situation for Chantel. It must have felt really difficult and hard trying to keep everything together, to follow your plans and your dreams and not have things fall apart. How did you do it? What did you do to manage to keep everything together?
You know, my parents weren't together physically, right?
Mhm.
But they were able to reconcile their differences and to be able to have this newfangled type of co-parenting, mostly by phone, right? And then also, my mom was, coming back and forth and spending, 4 weeks out of the year with us, on average. And so they each have their own sense of stability and an own sense of work ethic, right? And so that was one thing that was also instilled in myself and my siblings, is that work ethic, because we all worked. I remember my brother had a paper route when he was 8 years old, and he used to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to deliver his papers. I was very very young at that time, but and so I knew that I had to figure out how to get it together, because even with the tumultuous way that I was raised, there was a work ethic within my mom and my dad that I knew that I couldn't just wait around and be on public assistance for a long period of time. Although I will say public assistance is there to provide assistance to you when you need it. And I viewed it as assistance short term. And so my primary reason for even existing at that point and getting up every morning was my daughter. And I had a lot of faith, and I prayed every day that God would show me exactly what I needed to be doing. I felt like I was failing, and one of the things that I always remember that my dad said to me is that I could do better, and that always formed a word cloud in my head. And so I moved to Durham, North Carolina, where I enrolled in North Carolina Central University to pursue my undergraduate degree in psychology, because at that time I felt like I wanted to be a psychologist. Um, and going to that school, in my experience there, it changed my entire life. I will always be grateful for being an Eagle. Walking around that campus with all the motivated and educated Black people really lit a fire in me, and as it related to education and learning, because that's something I could control. I could control my education. I could control preparing myself for whatever I was going to do. I could control doing something that was going to make me a better person. I was in control of my learning. I was in control of my destiny. When I went and I walked on that campus for the first time, I felt that I belonged there. I still remember the first class that I had enrolled in, which was abnormal psychology, which helped me understand so much more about myself, because I was feeling a little bit abnormal at the time, to be honest with you. But to understand some of the diagnoses as it relates to, behavior health and excuse me, psychology and all of that. And so, going to school at Central really, really changed my life and my perspective of who I was, because I began to feel I began to feel more in control at that time.
Yeah. And and when we look at chapter 16 in the book, it's titled A New Phase, and a new phase begins. And
Mm,
so I feel like, you know, that was the start, the beginning of your journey to becoming
mm,
the who you are today, Dr. Marie. Um,
mhm.
Talk a little bit about that and how NCC attending North Carolina Central University and getting it together and the word cloud within in your head from your dad's last few words to you. Talk a little bit about that.
So yeah, so after I started attending North Carolina Central, I started to feel a little bit more whole on the inside. But I was also learning how to push my emotions down, 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 and be able to forge ahead. Because I also got a position. I started working at this group home as a direct care staff, like providing direct care to again troubled youth. Because again, I saw myself in them. My behaviors obviously were not, that extreme, but I saw myself in them, and I knew that they had each had dealt with their own issues. But probably within 3 months of getting that position, the manager was terminated, and I was asked to assume that position as the manager. And so I felt like I'm in school now. I'm getting good grades. I graduated with honors actually. Um, Never got less than a B plus, and was always not happy if I got less than an A. But that statistics class, honey. Um, there's a B, set me free. I was going to accept that B in that advanced class. But I had a management position, and I was in school, so I was moving forward. I became expert at suppressing my feelings and putting on this mask that indicated that everything was okay. Now, don't get me wrong, I love school. And the position that I was working at with this organization, I remained in that position for 7 years. And at the time, by the time I left 7 years later, I had actually got promoted to director of administrative and clinical services for a region. So I was thriving, but I still hadn't dealt with my internalized emotions. I was dating intermittently. I had a few serious relationships along the way, um, but I wasn't letting people completely in because I wasn't healed. And when it seemed like it was getting too close to, wanting to be married or with whatever relationship, I just kind of walked away. And so, although my relationship with my mom had improved considerably and I spent a lot of time with my family, I was still struggling in a lot of ways.
And when it comes to relationships, around this very time is when you met the gentleman who would become your future husband, Alvin. So, but it wasn't an instant connection. Can you talk a little bit about that? What was going on there?
So, wow, when I met Alvin, I actually met him. I had a friend of mine, a really good friend, that's still a really good friend to this day, that I would go home with me to Jacksonville on the weekends because when I moved to go to school in Durham, I had to leave Chantel in Jacksonville because I didn't know anybody. I was working full time, going to school full time, and I didn't want her to end up in daycare all day. So every single weekend, I went to Jacksonville, which was a 2.5 hour, 3 hour drive. And so a lot of times my girlfriend went with me and we would hang out, we would dance and we would have fun. We had a lot of family dinners and picnics and all these things and trying to recreate all this time with my mom because she had been away. So I was out with Annie at breakfast, and there were these two gentlemen that were also there, and we were kind of exchanging sheepish glances, and got up to leave, and they followed us out, and Alvin, my current husband, and his friend, his name was Rodney Key. Introduced themselves to us, and we talked a little bit. I was a little bit standoffish, I think, because um, I just was at a place I was trying to get myself together. And so we exchanged phone numbers, and I promised to call him. Or actually, no, he gave me his phone number. I don't think I gave him my number. he gave me his number. I promised to call him. Got home, got busy, back into the crazy routine, and misplaced his number, and I didn't call him. So 6 months later, I'm in Jacksonville again, and I'm headed to the military store, which is called the Exchange. And a car drives up beside me, and I look over and I recognize him and his same friend um, in the car. And he ends up following me to the Exchange, and we talk. And then this time we exchange phone numbers, and we talked back and forth on the phone um, almost every night. And there were some complicated things that were happening. He was married but had been separated for over a year, and his wife was living in a different state, and um, um, they had planned to divorce, and I didn't want to be engaged in a complicated relationship. And we started dating, and I finally said to him, "Listen, I don't want to keep wasting my time. If you're going to reconcile, reconcile. If you're going to get divorced." Um, so we ended up separating for a while, and he subsequently got divorced, and we ended up reconnecting, and kind of the rest is history. There's a lot of in between in that conversation, but obviously this is just a high level discussion about that. But that was kind of that transition for me, because even though I had dated before and had even accepted an engagement before, I wasn't sure if I had really was ready to get married. I had been single for officially single and without a husband for almost 10 years
Oh, wow.
at the time. And so I was into my own routine, and I was feeling really good about me. I was in graduate school pursuing a graduate degree in psychology by the time I met him, living in my own house, had my own car. My daughter was with me, and things had stabilized for me. So I was selective. And I knew that I felt like I was a really good catch, at that time, and,
Oh,
and, and
you are.
had options. And plus I was just I wanted to be in a good place and have some stabilization for myself and for my daughter before I move forward with a relationship. So that's just kind of the beginning of the next phase of my life, if you will.
Well, I can understand that, and I appreciate you talking a little bit about that. And I know we'll discuss Alvin a little your relationship with Alvin a little bit more in our next episode. So
Mhm,
as we keep the conversation going about the book, let
mhm,
me grab it again. Getting to My Enough by Dr. Marie Brown Mercadel.
yeah.
We'll be talking about the next few chapters, and I'm so excited that we have more episodes coming our way and that we're
Mhm,
going to keep this conversation going. But we
mhm,
also want to encourage our listeners to keep their end of the conversation going. We want to
mhm,
encourage you to reach out to us on the YouTube channel and let us know what additional thoughts you may have about our discussion, as well as your own experiences with this phenomenon and this type of trauma that Marie is addressing in her book. And then we also invite you to check out and share the collection of resources that we have provided for listeners. So anyone who may be in need of behavioral health resources and support for managing their own trauma, those resources will be available to help you with that.
mhm,
So continue to visit our channel for new content and
mhm,
collection of topics that we think you'll find interesting.
mhm.
Marie, before we go, would you like to discuss some insights and key takeaways?
Yeah, one of the things I really want to discuss is, I'm just so full of gratitude to be able to do this podcast in conjunction with the Sip and Heals, to be able to have conversations, authentic, open conversations with women. I know the content is heavy in a lot of respects, but what we're dealing with is also heavy in a lot of respects too. And I think I shared with you earlier in our pre-conversation that I'm I'm surprised and amazed by the women who are sharing their own stories of trauma. And we talk about the strong Black woman moniker. right? And I think that strong Black woman moniker has been a disservice to us at this point in our lives.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, we have used that strong and we can handle this and we can handle that. And, we can be, the moms and the single parents and the wives and the grandmothers and the employees and the friend. And we can handle everything. And because our ancestors handled everything, right? Everyone did all these things so that we could make it and be here. But one of the things that is so important to me is my granddaughter and my great nieces that are all in the same age range and the 10s and the 11s. And there's a lot of them. And I can't even keep up with the number because fortunately they keep multiplying in a good way. But I don't want them to carry the burden of having to be the strong Black woman that holds on to everything and keeps everything in because literally it's killing us. It's manifesting itself in a lot of ways. And, when I talk about living with anxiety every day, that doesn't mean I'm climbing the walls every day, right? Because I'm not. I have a very full, productive life. I'm happy about where I am right now. But I think people don't understand what anxiety can look like. It can look like sleeping too much. It can look like not sleeping at all. It can look like overeating. It can look like drinking too much wine every day. It can look like drinking, using substances. It can look like staying on the internet all day. It can look like shopping every single day. It can look like a lot of different things that we're not calling it. But I want people to be able to call it. Last night, I was in a session and someone said, listen, I have depression and I have anxiety and I take medication. And I'm saying that out loud. And I was so proud of her because her daughters were in the room. And she said, and my daughters go to therapy too. And I wanted to just jump up and give her the biggest bear hug because thank you
Right?
putting that burden on your children that something is wrong with them. Um, and so that's the biggest thing for me. It's hard being transparent because some people will change or have definitely changed their opinion of me by reading this book. Most people are 100% supportive, but a lot of people would rather just continue to have this vision of this beautiful picture, right? Right.
Yes.
And so I'm just happy that we're doing this and having these conversations. I have Sip and Heal events scheduled out through the end of October.
That's
And I'll
awesome.
keep having this message and keep having these conversations and keep encouraging women. And I'm so happy that at our next phase of these podcasts, we're going to be inviting some of these women here to share their stories and to reduce that stigma and to see that anxiety, depression, trauma, resilience, healing has different faces and at different stages of people's lives that we can meet them. So thank you again for agreeing to do this with me because I know that we are reaching people and I know that we are going to be helping people get to their enough every single day.
Absolutely. Real quick though, where can people buy the book?
So, at the end of our podcast, right, we are going to have the link, and you can go to my website at www.mercadelconsultingsolutions.net. For there, you can also find a list of resources. You can also find out when the Sip and Heals are being held. You can also find out a lot more about my coaching business, my individual coaching business there. And you can also contact me through my email there or follow me on Instagram or on Facebook or even Twitter. And so I'm looking forward to hearing from you all. We would love for you to have some comments in the chat. Tell us what we need to do better, what you would like to hear more about, any of the resources that you might be interested in. Just give us your thoughts in general. Any feedback, we can accept any type of constructive criticism because we want to do better. We want this to be a podcast that people can benefit from. And so please, we would love to hear from you. And thank you so much for tuning in with us today or tonight or in the morning or whenever you're watching us.
Great. Thank you so much. And with that, we'll say, see you next time.